what happened in the past already with WikiLeaks, where they had in 2010, 2011, had released the Cablegate papers, where they showed all these war crimes being committed by the US and its allies in the Middle East. And then they had their financial services blocked off. So they had like economic sanctions, financial sanctions thrusted upon them. They couldn't access a lot of their money in different places. But they had started accepting Bitcoin as a way to receive donations. And that was like the first time that Bitcoin had this like clear use case. Like people were able to send Bitcoin, nobody could stop it. And then they were able to use that Bitcoin to fund their infrastructure. And that turned out to be like a wildly successful bet that they made. Even though, like at the time, Satoshi Nakamoto, like one of his last messages was telling WikiLeaks, like, don't do that for whatever reason. He said Bitcoin wasn't ready, but they did it anyways, and it ended up being a good bet. So I think in these situations of economic and financial sanctions, if those are thrusted upon you, or if that's a threat of that being thrusted upon you, then cryptocurrency generally is like something that can be useful. Whether Bitcoin is better for that than other ones, I'm a little bit skeptical, but maybe you're in a country where, I don't know, for some reason, the infrastructure for Bitcoin is a whole lot better than like Ethereum, for example, or something like that. Like I spend not so much time focusing on Bitcoin for my own podcast or my own writing, just because I do feel that it is quite captured at this point, and it's hard for me to see any wiggle room for really where there is like radical left wing potential there, except in like very, niche circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's a little bit of a value neutral element to Bitcoin left. It's kind of like a blank slate in some ways, where yes, it's been in terms of like culture at least captured very much by right wing ideology, but at the same time, it is inherently value neutral in the sense that you could be a left winger who believes that we are spending money incorrectly, and you would use the examples that I cited, such as you're funding a genocide in Palestine, you are exacerbating a war in Ukraine that shouldn't have happened in the first place, you are, whatever, right? You're not spending enough on a social safety net. Or you could be a right winger who, might be anti-war in some respects, but also doesn't want a social safety net. So it's
Mm.
value neutral in that sense. And in both those scenarios, like you could imagine a situation where there is like some sort of monetary debasement which goes on. Bitcoin is going to be the thing that maybe helps. Again, this has not been tested out. We don't have evidence yet that it's behaving this way. My suspicion is long term, it probably will start to behave in such a way, but that is all theoretical. What about questions of Bitcoin as money? In your book, you're kind of skeptical of this idea of cryptocurrency. You says it has money-like properties, but it's not really money, right? And perhaps you're using, maybe a technical definition of money that people are less aware of. So can you comment a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. So definitely like the narrative in the crypto world, in Bitcoin world, I would say actually more specifically, oftentimes is that Bitcoin is money and it's the best money out there. It's the best money you can ever have. It's similar to gold and the gold standard. And, all of our problems started whenever, the United States left the gold standard. And now we need to go back and we can show our support for doing that by buying Bitcoin. But I think there is this like, yeah, kind of big misunderstanding about what money actually is and how it works in like the Bitcoin community. I think they have like very, very rigid and like almost like too specific of idea of what makes money. They think like the idea that you can just, if you believe something is money, or if you just like kind of use it as money within your circle, therefore makes it money, almost like we're like willing it to be. But I think there's a lot more bigger systemic and institutional factors to take into account whether we want to say something is like really money. Of course, this is always like on a spectrum. So I'm trying to like not completely say that like it's not money and it's ridiculous for you to say so, because there are a lot of like similar properties. Of course, I can send and receive Bitcoin in the same way that I can send and receive money. So in like some ways it looks like money. But money has like these like real characteristics. The most common, or like one way that I like to kind of explain this difference is through like whenever you want to buy something in Bitcoin, let's say online, like e-commerce, say you're on the dark web and you're buying weed or something like that. The weed, like the object, the commodity you want to buy online is going to be priced in dollars usually, and then it's going to convert that into what that means in Bitcoin. So like every day or however much amount of time, the price is changing depending on the relationship, the price of Bitcoin related to the actual money, which is dollar. So the thing, what is the thing priced in is what the money is, right? So it would be dollar. So what you're doing when you're like using the dark web, for example, then you are doing what's called a counter trade, where you are, trading the Bitcoin in the amount like equal to the amount of money at that moment and trading it for, the thing that you're buying. And that's like a financial, you know, thing that people do in financial markets all the time. They'll trade commodities. It's almost like barter, except where there's a like an imaginary number of money in which that counts. So for me, just to conclude, is that Bitcoin isn't money, but that's not a bad thing. That in fact, it is actually quite good that Bitcoin is not money. And it is the reason why organizations like WikiLeaks, like SciHub is another one, they're able to use cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin in order to receive donations, to receive money, to pay for things because it is not money. So the fact that it cannot be blocked mean it like is in a way it is not money in a digital and through digital platforms.
Yeah, I agree with you that I would be kind of hesitant to outright call something like Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency money, but at the same time, the money-like properties they're not only there, but they seem to be accelerating in some ways. Using some of the examples you cited in the book, you have your bread token, I believe it's called, yeah, which is basically kind of like a chain for like social good, social activism, where basically you use a DAI deposit, which is a stable coin deposit into AV for some sort of interest returns. These interest returns are then recycled into causes that one believes in. There's no actual immediate financial benefit because the bread token is pegged to the DAI stablecoin, which itself is pegged to $1. Right, which only very rarely deviates from $1. That in itself, like we're still kind of like at the stage in cryptocurrency where the phrase cryptocurrency, like it's kind of critical to what's happening in the sense that everything is still kind of like pure financialization in various ways. You could use it for
Mm.
different purposes, but it's still financialization. You wrote a blog post about during the 2020 eviction crisis. It was something along the lines of it's a token for
Housing
like
for all
housing for
token.
all, yeah, housing for
Yeah.
all token. And even that, like in some senses, okay, so it would be like a token that would basically, I'm not sure if it would work like as an NFT or whatever, where it's like, okay, where the metadata in this NFT indicates that this is a guy who's a single father, right? Or this is a woman, this is a couple, right, with two children, and obviously you're going to have different kinds of housing units depending on these different needs. But even that in and of itself, like something like housing, it has a kind of scarcity attached to it, right? And part of that scarcity would also obviously be the fact that personhood is scarce, right? Human beings are a minority on this planet. We have many more cows than we have people. We have many more bacteria and other animals versus people. So they don't get personhood. We do. As people, we're entitled to these housing units. That kind of scarcity, that it's still a kind of financialization. Yes, it's more roundabout, but we're still dealing with these kinds of financialization schemes. Like, do you imagine blockchain utility? And we should honestly, after this, just like define blockchain for people that are confused, because my audience that probably doesn't really know much about this. But like, do you think like crypto is going to get beyond this these models of scarcity, non-scarcity, financialization with different spectrums of that? Like do you think we're going any way other than that direction? Like, are we going to put anything else like on chain and use it that it's not just I don't want to say the word profit, right? But it's like some sort of financialization scheme,
Mm.
whether for good or ill. Still, we're talking about financialization.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that uh, it has happened to a certain extent in many ways. Um, I mean, there, although people, we might talk about it later, but like there are NFTs, for example. I mean, people buy NFTs also not necessarily for wanting to generate a profit, right? You can have there is definitely a market for NFTs where people are trying to buy a piece of art and then sell it for a profit. But NFTs are not just like crypto art. They're not just like digital image. They're a little bit more complicated and a little bit more. There are reasons to like want to use these things for non-financialized reasons. I think it's important maybe to define financialization. Financialization kind of means that you are commoditizing more or marketizing more some type of service or product, which was not done that way before. So I would argue that, like, a housing for all token, let's say, that I mentioned in the book, that's an anti-financialization scheme, I would argue, because we're not it's opposing the real estate market or choosing to allocate our housing resources via markets and instead choosing to allocate it based on needs of the community. So it would be like an anti-financialization. But I think in general, yes, there is like this trend and need and desire to move away from financialization, although there is still a very, very strong contingency of people who wants to financialize everything pretty much. But there has been like an increase, for example, in like different types of like new forms of social media that use blockchains that are on chain. That I would argue they're it's hard to say whether they're doing more financialization by using on-chain kind of functions, or that they're making the financialization that's already present in currently existing social media platforms and simply making them visible.
Mhm.
So I think there's like perhaps a debate or conversation between people to have on that, which just is happening. But yeah, I think in general as well, like we will have to create those applications that are non-financialized, and we will have to like take part in using them. It's just like really hard, I think, for a lot of people whenever um, just kind of like the status quo in crypto world is if you want to get a lot of if you need want to get enough money for people to for you to build the infrastructure for that application, you have to provide some sort of incentive, and that's I think related to just like the general problems of capitalism that we live under.